In previous presentations, I have mentioned that my goal has become back to basics, and that as a way to get back to basics, God has laid 3 specific words on my heart: grace, mercy, and compassion. In the IFOC Chaplain Training course, we state that compassion is one of our core characteristics. So if I asked you for a definition of compassion, I'm confident that you could give an accurate description. So why bother with a conversation about compassion? It's because these words, grace, mercy, and compassion, are attributes and characteristics of how our Father wants us to live our lives. The Bible teaches us that compassion is a true mark of Christian character. Zechariah 7:9-10 says, "This is what the Lord Almighty said: administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another, so it might be worth our time to take a closer look at these words." In previous presentations, I talked about grace and mercy. So today, I want to talk to you about compassion. The meaning of compassion is to recognize the suffering of others and then take action to help. Compassion embodies a tangible expression of love for those who are suffering. There is action associated with compassion, and that action is mercy. The definition of compassion, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is the sympathetic consciousness of another's distress together with a desire to alleviate it. Another way to think of it is that it means to suffer together. The New Oxford American Dictionary defines compassion as a sympathetic pity and concern for suffering or the misfortune of others. Now, Merriam-Webster mentions a desire to alleviate the distress of others, whereas the New Oxford American Dictionary simply refers to the broad, sympathetic feelings associated with compassion. It doesn't connect those feelings of sympathy and pity to any action or thought of an action. So, in essence, it really is an incomplete definition. The point is, compassion in and of itself is not just a feeling. The complete definition is a feeling which spurs action. What is the action? It's mercy. So let's take a few minutes and discuss some words that are often associated with compassion. All of this in an effort to really understand the true intention behind compassion. So what's the difference between compassion and empathy? Well, compassion comes into the English language by the way of the Latin root passio, which means to suffer, paired with the Latin prefix cum, meaning to suffer together or to suffer with. So the connection of suffering with another person brings compassion beyond just sympathy into the realm of empathy. However, compassion is much more than empathy. Empathy is the ability to relate to another person's pain as if it is your own. Empathy, like sympathy, is grounded in emotion and feeling, but empathy doesn't have an active component to it. It's not an action, it's a feeling. What does it mean to have compassion? Well, the component of action is what separates compassion from empathy, sympathy, pity, concern, condolence, sensitivity, tenderness, commiseration, or any other compassion synonym. Compassion gets involved. When others keep their distance from those who are suffering, compassion prompts us to act on their behalf. Author Frederick Buckner describes what it means to have compassion in this way. Quote, "Compassion is sometimes the fatal capacity for feeling what it is like to live inside someone else's skin. It's the knowledge that there can never really be any peace and joy for me until there is peace and joy finally for you too." End quote. To have compassion means to empathize with someone who is suffering and to feel compelled to reduce the suffering. It's a feeling plus an action. It's a fuller, truer definition beyond just feelings alone. The Bible talks a lot about God's compassion, and His definition goes far beyond just a feeling. The Bible doesn't explain compassion like a dictionary does, simply telling us what the word means. Instead, the Bible defines compassion by showing us what it looks like and what is involved with being compassionate. 1 John 3:18 says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth." So we are to live with compassion, which spurs us to take action. Colossians 3:12 says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." God tells us we are to be compassionate. It's not what we do, it is who we are to be. Compassion is like being a chaplain. Chaplaincy is not what we do, but rather it's who we are. The spirit of the word compassion is synonymous with action. Compassion's not just concerned with the material or physical things. It's concerned with the suffering of the human spirit and soul. The spiritual definition of compassion involves acting to alleviate the suffering of others. Now, let me stop right here. You might recall in the chaplain course, we talked about supporting people versus helping people, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Compassion is not a setup to fix everyone's problems. I just said it's a feeling that spurs us to action. But if we try to fix everything for everyone, we run the risk of getting burned out, of having compassion fatigue, and then we end up in the ditch. To help relieve suffering does not mean that you personally have to make every phone call or do everything for everybody, but rather it is to understand the expectation of compassion. It might mean to take a few minutes and listen to someone who needs to talk. Listening is an action. It might mean being a connector or just being available. There's a fine line between sharing a burden and taking a burden. The action might be to offer resources or connect someone to a local faith community. The other side of the coin is that it might mean we need to take a greater action. James 2:15 through 17 says, "Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, 'Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead." So compassion does not mean that if you encounter a person without shelter, perhaps a homeless person, that you're responsible for setting them up in a new home with furniture and a car. Now listen, if you have the resources to do that, great. But not many of us do. Our action might mean providing a meal for them right now, or connecting them with a shelter for the night, or following up with other resources. Again, It doesn't mean we are responsible for fixing everyone's problems. Y'all, we are not God. We don't have that power or capability, but neither does it mean that we're completely off the hook. So let's talk about the difference between mercy and compassion.
What you're doing here is exciting. It's an opportunity for us to see old friends and to make brand new ones.